Fineprint with me, Molly Gambhir. Starting off first with the latest coming in from the American city of Minneapolis, where tensions have been on the rise. It has been rocked by violent protests after the death of an unarmed black man at the hands of a police officer. Rallies that were initially peaceful gave way to a third night of arson, looting and vandalism. A 46-year-old black man, George Floyd, was killed by the Minneapolis police on Monday. The video was taken by an onlooker. It shows the fatal encounter where George Floyd was seen lying face down and handcuffed, pleading for help and repeatedly saying, "Please, I can't breathe," before he became motionless.
Dude, listen.
He is human, bro.
His nose.
You can put him in the car. He's responsive right now. He's not responsive right now, bro. Yeah, I bet you. Bro, I barely touched me like that, dude. I swear I saw the fuck out.
The fact that you guys aren't checking his pulse and doing compressions if he needs that, you guys are on another level.
Stores were looted and burned overnight in Minneapolis as the protest turned violent. The latest round of unrest in the city went largely unchecked, despite the governor ordering for the National Guard to be activated to help restore order. Authorities in Minneapolis and its sister city, St. Paul, got reinforcements from the National Guard on Thursday as they prepared for a fresh round of protests. Late Thursday, shots were fired in downtown Denver during a protest. There were no immediate reports of injuries. Police officials said the shooting happened inside a park across the street. US President Donald Trump, meanwhile, tweeted on the unfolding events, saying, and I'm quoting now, "I can't stand back and watch this happen to a great American city. A total lack of leadership. Either the very weak radical left mayor Jacob Frey get his act together and bring the city under control, or I will send in the National Guard and get the job done right," unquote. The U.S. Department of Justice has said that the investigation into the death is robust and meticulous, quote unquote.
To be clear, the Department of Justice has made the investigation in this case a top priority. We have assigned highest of the high in my office to investigate and look at the case. FBI likewise has assigned their experienced law enforcement officers to conduct the investigation. And to be clear, President Trump, as well as Attorney General William Barr, are directly and actively monitoring the investigation in this case. I have had direct communications with Attorney General Barr and his staff, and will continue to do so. The federal investigation in this case will determine whether the actions the former Minneapolis police officers took violated any federal criminal laws, to include any civil rights violations.
The Minneapolis mayor on Thursday called for more understanding of the built-up anger and sadness experienced by the African Americans following the protests and reports of looting and vandalism. Not just that, he also said that African Americans are dealing with not just 5 minutes of horror, but 400 years.
Over the last 2 days and the emotion-ridden conflict over last night is the result of so much built-up anger and sadness. Anger and sadness that has been ingrained in our black community, not just because of 5 minutes of horror, but 400 years.
The UN rights chief has condemned the deaths in police custody of George Floyd, demanding that the American authorities take serious action, quote unquote, to stop the killings of unarmed African Americans. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Michelle Bachelet, said in a statement, and I'm quoting now, "This is the latest in a long line of killings of unarmed African Americans by US police officers and members of the public. US authorities must take serious action to stop such killings and to ensure justice is done when they do occur," unquote. Joining us live on the broadcast this minute is our correspondent from Washington, D.C., Simon Marks. Hi, Simon. A lot of developments that have unfolded over the last 24 hours. As Jacob Frey put it, African Americans are dealing with not just 5 minutes of horror that, of course, was captured on camera, but 400 years. Now, the situation on the ground is turning all the more violent, and when we have the president of the country using words like looting will result in shooting, that definitely does not help the situation.
Yeah, and I think it's important, Molly, to underscore the historical background to that phrase that President Trump used on Twitter a few hours ago in threatening to send in the National Guard to Minneapolis to pacify the situation there. He used this phrase, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts," a very clear indication that he was willing to unleash the use of force against protesters that he called thugs, and he capitalized the use of the word thugs just in case anyone didn't capture his vehemence on the issue. That phrase, "when the looting starts, the shooting starts," was first used in 1967 by the racist white police chief in Miami. He was issuing a warning at the time to predominantly black protesters who were planning to protest against the Republican Party's convention in the city in 1967. It is a phrase deeply resonant for African American protesters and supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement all over the United States. And we've seen just astonishing scenes now. 3 nights of violent clashes between protesters in Minneapolis and police. The protesters still don't understand why it is taking so long for criminal charges to be laid out against at least one of the police officers present at the scene of George Floyd's death. There are concerns now about the possibility of these protests spreading. There were protests in New York last night. We're heading into a weekend here. It is highly likely that we're going to see additional demonstrations in Minneapolis and in other parts of the country. And extraordinary scenes on American television here this morning with a black CNN reporter, Omar Jimenez, being arrested by police in Minneapolis while he was live on the air after very calmly asking the police where they wanted him and his crew to move, where they should stand in order to get out of the way of police. He was summarily arrested and taken away along with members of his crew, only to be released a couple of hours later after the direct intervention of the governor of Minnesota. This situation in Minneapolis and elsewhere is now a tinderbox.
Right, stay with me, Simon. Tensions on the rise also between Twitter and US President Donald Trump. That battle has only intensified over the last few hours. Twitter has now flagged US President Donald Trump's tweet on Minneapolis for allegedly glorifying violence. The tweet that we were just referring to. On your screens now is Trump's tweet with a disclaimer by Twitter. In the tweet, Donald Trump appeared to warn the rioters and call for shooting as the protests over the killing of George Floyd had intensified on the ground. Going back across now to Simon. Simon, the White House has also put out that tweet, and post which Twitter has again flagged it. So we don't see this cycle of the friction that we are seeing between the two sides dying down anytime soon. But what's important to note here is that many have been calling this Twitter battle that the president has started as a way to distract the people from the actual crisis, which is the coronavirus-related death toll, which has only been mounting. And a press conference that was held in which The president was not even asked about the mounting death toll. So it seems like the distraction move is working in favor of the president.
Well, I think there's no question about that, Molly. You're absolutely right. In that encounter with press yesterday in the Oval Office, President Trump was signing an executive order that accuses Twitter of trying to censor him and was threatening to try and inspire the creation of new legislation that will regulate Twitter and other social media platforms so that they can be held accountable for the things that people say on those platforms, rather than simply saying we're hands off here, which is what Facebook, of course, does. And Mark Zuckerberg has very much doubled down on that in the last few hours. But this was, many observers here argue, an attempt to distract the public's attention away from the fact that just a few hours ago, America passed the 100,000 fatality mark in terms of COVID-19's impact on the United States, and that COVID-19 remains a very pernicious problem here. An uptick in new infections being recorded in 27 of America's 50 states after lockdown restrictions were relaxed in many parts of the country. Astonishingly, not a single reporter in that Oval Office yesterday got round to asking President Trump for his public reaction to America reaching that grim milestone. We have not heard verbally from President Trump on the issue. He put out one tweet after the 100,000th death was recorded, but verbally he has never addressed the issue. And first of all, by focusing his attention on this war with Twitter, and the White House has just doubled down on it. On the White House feed, they say the president did not glorify violence. He clearly condemned it. They're accusing Twitter of being of having biased, bad faith fact checkers. So the war with Twitter goes on. Now the president's got another distraction that he's fueling, which is, of course, these protests in Minneapolis. The country's attention clearly now being dragged away from the COVID-19 situation, largely at the behest of the President of the United States.